Welcome to an evening with the Guild Modular project, which is a venture to promote clubs, groups, or individuals being able to build a layout which can become part of something larger. If anyone has any specific requests, please let us know via chat so we can cover those too. Welcome to those able to attend this evening to explain the projects. But first, an overview of the whole project from Jackie Neeshaw, our chairman.
Thank you, everybody. If anybody has any problems seeing the slides, let me know, but hopefully these will be fairly clear to everybody. Can I just get a wave from Ian to say that that's on screen okay? Excellent, thank you very much. Well, as Ian said, now that I am chairman of the Guild, I've taken over leadership for the modular layout project from Charles Oldroyd. So to start with, we wanted to just remind people why this project came about. And we were certainly getting a lot of feedback from members saying that they would like to see a large layout at Gildex, but obviously the number that are available are quite limited. We know that quite a lot of clubs and individuals just don't have room for one. To have something there at Gildex every year would also be quite expensive because the ones that are available are obviously scattered around the country. And we knew that the idea of modular layouts wasn't new. And in fact, as many of our German and European colleagues would say, they've been doing it for a jolly long time. So the question was posed, could the Guild actually provide the fiddle yard boards and the end curves and then have different participants who could fill the gap? So the idea in a schematic was to actually have the Guild boards, which are these dotted ones. So fiddle yard boards at the back here, end curves, which I'll show you in more detail. And then we could either have one group doing the scenic modules to cover 24 feet, or you could have two groups doing 12 feet each that would join together and fill the scenic section. And obviously, depending on the number of participants you have, it means that people would be able to rotate, bringing something to Gildex. And you'll hear at the end that it will now be available at other shows as well. But we could have a nice rotation going where people feel encouraged to build something back at club or back at home that is small enough for them to use as an end-to-end layout, but they can bring it along and turn it into a large continuous running layout. So this shows it in a bit more detail. We've obviously got the 24 feet fiddle yard, which belongs to the Gaujo Guild. The end curves, which again belong to the Guild and have been provided by the Guild. If you see, the curves are a minimum 6 foot radius, and Ian's popped in there actually 6'6" just from the accuracy point of view. And there's a transition board that takes you from the half circles into the actual large rectangular boards, and you'll see pictures of these as we go through. And then you can, as we said, either have one group doing the full 6 boards or two groups doing 3 4 foot boards. And it depends what space they've got and, what capacity they've got for building a layout that can be standalone and store it at club or at home. This shows the, again, schematic of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are the fiddle yard boards. We then go round with a transition board, which is the different shape, end curves, another transition board, scenic gap, which somebody will fill, and then another two transition boards and the 4 end curves. And as you can see, it's about 40 foot, 7 inches and 3/4 long, and the width is 16.1 feet. So you can see that it's quite a large undertaking when it's actually all set up together, but manageable for most people if they're just filling the scenic gap. So how do we get started with this? It was decided that St Neots Model Railway Club, where we have a lot of O-Gauge members, Ian and I are both members there, Dave, who's in the audience, Simon, who will be speaking to you shortly, Bob, you can see there is a guild member, and several others, that as we had a very large group of O-Gauge modelers, we would take on building the end curves and obviously putting all the track plans down that you can see Simon and Bob doing on the left-hand side, and then pinning all the track and actually having the opportunity to teach some of our younger members like Chris proved very, very beneficial. And as we wanted to do a full 24 scenic section, it was advantageous for us to actually be involved in building the end curves and actually making sure they would line up with ours. So yes, we had a lot of enthusiasm, but we also had some feedback by actually doing the build and actually making sure everything fitted together. We eventually got the end curves done and had fun testing them and making sure things didn't fly off the end when we had them stood up. And we're fortunate that we've got a large village hall which we use as our club room. And apart from meeting on a Wednesday night, we can hire the hall for a full day. So in actually, you can see another 7mm narrow gauge layout in the background there, which they were having a running day while we were busy working on the end curves. And again, you can see them there, another end curve just showing how it fits all together. Up in Keighley, I've just got one there, at the club which Charles obviously is a member and chairman of, they, as a group of O-Gauge modelers, decided to start on the fiddle yard boards. So on the right-hand side here, you can see one of the fiddle yard boards. And when I happened to be up there for a weathering workshop in June 2024, I took one of the transition boards, which you can see here, and an end curve board to make sure that they fitted together. So Keithley were building these boards and we were actually building the transition boards and the end curves, but we took the opportunity to just make sure while we were all in the same place that they did fit together. And there's a template which Ian will talk about, which actually goes in here to make sure that your tracks will join up from one board to another and align appropriately. The fiddle yard boards are on trestles, the rest of the boards are on legs, and it was just what each group chose by preference. The main thing was making sure it was the same height and that everything lined up. These boards are from Grange and Hodder, and they do provide them at a discount for participants, which is very helpful. I will say, and I'm sure others will comment as they go through, that we did have to reinforce them quite a bit, particularly the fiddle yard boards and the end curves and transitions, because they're the ones which have got to have some sort of longevity and be able to be transported around the country in and out the back of vans. And, you know, clearly we've got to make sure they don't get damaged after investing. And the money for the modular layout for all of these sections to be built has come from a legacy which we were left. So this is a benefit to members kindly gifted as a legacy from one of our past members. So everything went up to Gildex in 2024. Some of you will remember seeing literally the bare boards with the template laid on the end curves. The template hadn't been printed for the fiddle yards at this stage, but it proved to people that the concept worked. It did join together, and we showed with the A-frame there that there was a gap in the middle and sort of advertised the fact, can you fill this gap with a scenic section? Moving on to 2025, and the people in Keighley started to lay the underfelt so that there was a base for track laying on the fiddle yard boards. This is just another photograph of when we joined everything up together, showing an end curve, a transition board, and then obviously there's these fiddle yard boards times 6. And the sad thing was that although there was a lot of enthusiasm initially, the volunteers in Keighley started to dwindle. And that was because there was people who were moving on, doing other things, and a kind of what's in it for me a bit as well, because obviously they had plans to participate, but there was a lot of work to do beforehand before you could actually put your scenic section in. So in 2025, St Neots started to think, hang on a minute, we know that these fiddle yard boards are going to need to progress. And in March at Kettering 2025, we spoke to Charles Oldroyd and said, look, you seem to be ending up doing all of this on your own. The foam's down, but the track hasn't been started yet. There's lots of points to go in on the fiddle yard. We've got a lot of point motors to go in, a lot of wiring to be done. Can we help? Which he was very grateful for. So Ian and I went up on the 7th of April and collected everything from Keighley and brought it back down. And the St Neots people were absolutely gracious in saying, yes, we'll help and we will actually put our time into this. But we really want to progress our scenic section track work first. So at least we've got two main lines running. So we didn't start work on the fiddle yards until May. The first thing we did in May was set it all up and make sure that the fiddle yard boards, and by this time Ian had printed out the template for the fiddle yard, fitted with the end curves. So you can see the transition board here and at the other end, and making sure it actually joined up with the rest of the guild end curves. So that was fine, that worked, and we could lay out a few points. And then the real coup was the fact that when we actually brought it together with the scenic section for what is Collingwood, which Simon will talk about, that fitted as well, which we were delighted about because we've built our own transition boards to replace the guild ones, which Simon will explain, to actually give this area a curve rather than a straight edge. So that's when it was first ever up on the 12th of May. Fiddle yard work, still a lot to be done, but at least we knew it would all join together. We couldn't get the hall as often as we would like to because it's full of all sorts of other things. So we were a bit creative and spoke to the person who owns the storage unit where we store all of the guild events equipment. And they said, yes, we could make use of the space, provided that we were happy to move out of the way if anybody came and wanted to get into their container. So in June, you can see that Ian's progressing there with a lot of track laying.
I was told I wasn't allowed out until I finished.
We didn't lock him in, honestly. We were able to bring it back to club. So by the 13th of June, more progress being made. And actually, the first set of wagons were being sort of wheeled up and down by hand. And then we move into the end of June and we're starting to get the wiring in. And I'm not going to steal Ian's thunder. I'll leave him to talk about the actual amount of work that goes on for the wiring. But you can see here, Dave Chapman, who's with us, spent a lot of time putting reinforcement into the corners. And if you do participate and use the Grange and Hodder boards, I would say that they do need some reinforcement just on these edges so that they're more robust. The 4th of July and the points are in, and more work going on with the wiring with point motors being fitted. It starts to look more like my knitting than it does anything else at the moment. It is much tidier now. And then the 16th of July, you can see that we're back in the storage unit. There were several of us there that day. Andrew Maisie's van is down that end, and we had various people working on different bits. I was there with the paintbrush. The Hoover was out making sure that we were keeping everything tidy. And Andrew and Ian were busy doing wiring and fitting points. And then moving into August, We put all of the fiddle yard up. It was wired, and the question was, will it work? And as you can imagine, by this time, we had Ian looking somewhat more ragged, with only 15 days to go. So it was a bit sort of hair standing on end and thinking, gosh, are we actually going to make this deadline? Fortunately, we actually moved on to a week later, and the 28th of August saw a full run round. We actually had everything up. We invited club members to come and see it because they had been very supportive. And you can see that the Collingwood side, which Simon will talk about, has started to get some buildings on it. But the main thing was that it all joined together and that the guild boards actually were running, and we had lots of trains going round. So that was definitely the day of celebration, because a week later it was going to Guildex. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, and he'll spotlight himself now and hand over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. So continuing on from the overall view of the modular project and how it's progressed, I'm going to go a little bit through some of the technical aspects that we had to make decisions on, mainly regarding the wiring and any interfaces. But I just want to start with the thing that Jackie highlighted or hinted at initially, was the end template for setting the track centers on the boards. So if you can move on to the next slide, Jackie. So this is a very nice plastic acrylic template produced by Intensio Model Railways. It is used to set the track centers or the rails positions for the two lines for the scenic boards that contributors were producing and taking part in. It is handed. So what I didn't realize initially when I first was using it to lay the track on the curve boards is there is a particular way this goes on each board. So I think you can just very faintly make out on the left-hand side on that vertical edge, it says this side inside. So that is the inside of the baseboard. So what would be, if you're part of the oval, it would be the inside edge. So the obviously you've got bolt holes and dowel pin holes that you can align it with. So this goes on the end of each board, and then you can set your track at one end or set some sort of marker at one end for where your rails need to be. You can then take it off and physically just put it on the other end of the baseboard to mark the other end if you need to have it completely straight. Intensio have been really good with providing these for us, and they're invaluable for setting the track centers. So it looks like it's quite a nice big substantial piece of plastic, but in fact it is just over half the width of one of the scenic baseboards, because you only have to go to just past the center line for where your two rails or your two tracks are going to be. And you can see on there as well, there is a center line, vertical center line between the two sets of tracks highlighted there. Okay, next slide then, Jackie, please.
Got a pop up at the bottom that seems to not go away at the moment.
Can you just hit right arrow on your keyboard? There you go. So wiring specification. We had a few chats with not just club members, but we also had a chat with a couple of the guys at Keithley, and I've spoken to a couple of the people that I know that are, know about building layouts and their wiring preferences, and also based on the techniques that we've used in the SR7 mill group that I'm a member of, we took the decision to use 24 strand 0.2 millimeter wire for the track power. A lot of people will probably think it's over-specified for what we need, but I personally would rather have over-specified wiring for a big layout like this. It gives you a bit of latitude and flexibility for making sure that, one, you're not having any voltage drops and you're not actually increasing any inductance across the cabling, because we've also got to take into account there are sockets and the jumper cables, and there's additional wiring that is being fed off this main wiring bus. So that is one reason why I've gone for quite a heavy duty wiring design. 2402 wire in theory is capable of taking 11 amps. So I don't think anybody will have any specification for that, but it would only take one group to come along with their section, say 24 feet. And if they're using a couple of 5 amp boosters, then you might start getting to a point where you need the overhead in terms of what the wire is capable of. The point motors are wired with 1602 wire for their power for switching them. Of course, the internal switching on the point motors is still being fed with 2402 for track power. For connecting the baseboards together, not just the fiddle-yard boards, but also the curved end boards, we selected 4-pole XLR connectors. And in the specification, I said Nutric are the best on the market. And that's what we've paid for, what the Guild has paid for the Guild boards, because they're a very high quality connector, that are robust, and they've got a really long life in terms of how many insertions you can use or do for each particular plug socket interface. We've also included 10 amp capable toggle switches, and these are for anybody who might be joining the project who are using DC. So they've got a capacity for a DC toggle switch because these are required for isolating sections. Although everybody at the moment taking part is DCC, we've still got to have the flexibility to allow somebody who might be doing DC to be involved, and also to be able to switch sections off in the fiddle yard. And then finally, dual pole, dual throw toggle switches, which are being used for operating points. Okay, next slide, please, Jackie.
I think Richard's got a question that he would like to ask, if that's
Of course.
okay.
Yes, I've had a question come up from Michael. Hi, on reinforcement of boards, have you tried the fiberglass tape with resin? Very strong but lightweight. It was featured in the Gazette last quarter.
We haven't, Michael, and one reason we decided not to go that particular route and rather go for increasing the rigidity at the corners and also in the centre areas of the bracing was because the baseboards, being 6mm ply, are quite flexible. They have quite a bit of twist in them, so it was reducing the twist was more important at that particular point than thinking about any weight constraints. If that's okay. So going back to electrics, Nutric connectors. So on the left here, you can see one of the 4-pin plugs that we have used. And on the right is a 4-pin socket. These are, of course, mounted onto the baseboards on the inner face, for obvious reasons. Next slide, please, Jackie. So each plug was made up into a cable with another plug on the other end. So we bought some 4-core wire in a reel, because rather than buying 4-pin XLR to XLR cables of the length we wanted and paying a lot of money for them, because they were actually quite expensive, I made them up for the group and for the Guild, because it actually worked out more cost effective. So this was just a wiring diagram, not just for me in terms of showing other people how we're wiring them, with red and blue on pins 1 and 2 and green and white on pins 3 and 4, but also it's important that anybody else who will need the XLRs to connect to the Guild boards have the same wiring convention in terms of what pins are connected to what other pins. So next slide, please, Jackie. And here you can see this was the first 12 of the Guild baseboard track circuit connector cables on my workbench upstairs. And there are 17 which were completed in total to allow us to connect the fiddle yard boards and all the curve boards together with the Guild cables. So these will go anywhere with the Guild baseboards to an exhibition in a box as part of the electrics for the fiddle yards and the curve boards. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of how the boards connect, here I've got basically a little CAD drawing showing 2 baseboards. They can be Guild curve boards or Guild fiddle yard boards with a 4-pole Nutric XLR on each end of a short cable, which acts like a U-link effectively. It's a glorified U-link, which connects the bus wiring across all 6 fiddle yard boards and 12 curve boards in total, isn't it? It's eight curve boards and 4 transition boards. And as I mentioned earlier, Nutrit connectors for reliability and long-term robustness. And next slide. Of course, having done the wiring specifications and making the cables up to join the boards together, I had to think about the wiring diagram and the wiring schematic for the fiddle yard. So this is basically just an overview. So you can see I've segmented it into 6 boards. It shows where the points are on each board. You can see how the red and blue wires are for one half of the fiddle yard, and the green and what are shown grey, which are actually white wires, are on the other half of the fiddle yard board. So basically 2 independent circuits. And also highlighted on there are the point motors, where they will be using the internal switching for changing the polarity of the crossing V's, as well as you can make out on some of these on the schematic where some of the isolating switches are as well, on the certainly on the red, what the red wires there and green wires at the bottom. Okay, next slide, Jackie. So once we'd got started with the fiddle yard wiring, we've got a little image here showing where there is an XLR connector. Going off to the right from that are red, blue, green, and white wires, which would go across the back of the face of the baseboard there to the XLR connector, the other end of the baseboard. But teed off that is a feed to a chocolate block, and chocolate blocks we've used to distribute the track power wiring across the board. Because obviously in some places we need to, on the fiddle yards where there are points, we need to feed more than one rail. So we have multiple feeds to different rails depending upon what their requirements are, and on whether they're green, white, or red, blue. Next slide. For the fiddle yard boards, we've installed Cobalt analog IP point machines. So there are effectively 8 at one end, 8 at the other, 4 on each track at each side. Independent power supplies for each end of the fiddle yard, because rather than having to wire the power for the point motors across all 6 boards, it's only jumping across 2 boards. So there's a separate wall wart type 12 volt power supply that plugs into a separate socket on one baseboard, and then you just jumper with another short cable between those 2 supplies across the baseboards. All points are operated by dual pole, dual throw toggle switches, and as I mentioned just slightly earlier, we use the internal switches on the point machines to change the polarity of the crossing V's on the points. And next slide, please, Jackie. And this is another view of a baseboard still being wired. So you can see there are some, just at the very top there, there's a roll of red wire, and there's quite a bit of blue and yellow hanging about there waiting to be installed. But this shows where you can see a Cobalt IP analog power point motor installed with a green, a white, and a yellow cable fitted. The green and white obviously for the traction power, and the yellow goes to the crossing V of the point. So that's the switched output from the point motor. And then just at the bottom there as well, you can make out one of the 10 amp toggle switches for controlling the isolating sections. Just on number 6, just above it. Okay, next slide, Jackie. For Gildex, we installed 2 Tam Valley circuit breakers on the fiddle yard boards, really because we're going to be using a different system for controlling Collingwood than what we used at Gildex. So the circuit breakers were installed on the fiddle yard boards because that was the easiest place that we could actually put wiring into the whole system, and jury rig it for operation at Gildex. So there were 2 circuit breakers, 1 for each loop, and they will be taken off fiddle yards at some point and installed onto one of the Collingwood boards to go in with our operating system that we've decided to use to drive Collingwood going forward. And I think that's it. Maybe next slide. Yeah, that was it from me. Thank you.
Okay, so we now want to introduce our scenic section participants. Unfortunately, not everybody could be here this evening, but we will be welcoming Simon Folds, who is the project lead for St Neots Model Railway Club. Andy Sparks is here to talk to us about Coulsdon Central. Brisbane District Model Railway Club is led by James Aitken, who unfortunately is out of the country tonight, and both Stephen Fay and Stephen Shepherd had other arrangements, so couldn't actually attend this evening. Mike Green, I think, is with us, who's at the planning stages, so he may be able to tell us a bit about what they're hoping to do. And I'll let you know what's happened with Keighley Model Railway Club because they've paused at the moment. So I'll be handing over to Simon Folds from St Neots Model Railway Club, who needs to unmute, and then Ian will spotlight for you. Okay.
Thank you. Yep, so as Jackie's alluded to, I've taken on the role of project manager of the Collingwood layout. I'm relatively new to Railway Club modelling, having only really been a member of the St Neots Club, I think 18 months now, and very quickly got involved in the O gauge and very quickly became the project lead for it. Not that I know what I'm doing most of the time. So we can move on to the next slide. We've got a plan here. I mean, I don't know, do you want to sort of cover off the template plan, Ian? Because I think you're closer to this than I was, because I joined after the planning stage.
I can do, yes. I mean, I'll leave you spotlight, but I'll just briefly go over this. There was a rough draft of a template plan already in evidence when I started going over to St Neots. I've been going over on and off for a few years because I've known John and Jackie for many years. And Jackie asked me if I could get involved and look at the template plan. And so I basically took the original plan as it was, which wasn't completed, and just finessed it and just made some minor changes to improve how it looked and the overall improvement in how the lines flowed, because there were a couple of little places where it didn't actually kind of like flow very gently, very nicely. For those of you who saw it at Gildex, the original plan wasn't as nicely laid out. So it was just a case of finessing the original plan and just making some gentle alterations. Back to yourself.
Next slide, please. So as Jackie alluded to, we've built 2 custom transition boards for St Neots Model Railway Club. The reason we needed these is because of the fact that we opted to go for a curved, continuous curve across the front rather than a straight through, in the same way that the filial boards are just bolted on and straight through. That obviously afforded us and we got a lot of feedback at Gildex actually over the curves and how nice it was to watch the trains as they meandered across the layout following the curve, and it sort of just gives it a better aesthetic. I think it's probably the best way of describing it. So the CAD design here shows the 2 custom fiddle yards in green each end, and then boards B through G, as we've labelled them rather than be numbers as per the guild boards. Board C is actually a dropped board in the sense that we have a canal lock passing underneath the track, with the track going across on a couple of bridges. So it's actually hung from boards B and D. If you want to move on to the next one, that shows how our scenic section fits within the overall plan. And as we say, those that were at Gildex will have seen it in place. I think we've seen lots of pictures like that. So we originally started the project as somewhere in Leicestershire. I'll say the group originally started the project somewhere in Leicestershire. It was being led by a club member, Colin McCallum, who sadly passed away in a road traffic accident. And so we've in the past sort of just in this past year, we've renamed our layout to Collingwood in a nod to his memory. The plan, going from left to right, I think we'll probably go as we're looking at it on screen. We come through the scenic break from the fiddle yards and the curved section. We come through the station. So we have a station building with platforms and a bay platform at the back that you can see there just being highlighted, with the siding behind coming around to cold staiths. As you come out of the station, we will have a signal box on the front edge of the layout. And as you can see, then we pass through a goods shed at the back before heading across the boards, and where the blue line comes through is an indication of where the canal comes under the track bed. And we've got the lock underneath the track bed. As the trains pass over the bridge, the actual lock is situated directly underneath. And that section's actually coming on really quite nicely at the moment. A lot of input from Jackie on that one, which is really good. And we then come around to the maltings at the end, and the maltings essentially is a sort of a nod to the evolution of sort of canals into railways, into road transport. So it's serviced by the canal originally, it's replaced the canal service with rail, and as we go through the scenic break, we'll have a bridge and roadway coming down and in. And connected to the maltings, we've also got a boiler house and chimney that's coming up on the layout. We have also, which isn't annotated on here, extended the back of the layout, because where the canal comes through, in order to give it a sort of added depth of realism, we felt that we needed a canal basin, so that the canal barges coming through the lock can sort of visually, you can see them coming around the back. And we'll be modelling a quayside behind the maltings, which, although not directly visible from the front, when it's in the full roundy sort of layout, people coming up the sides, looking over the edge, will be able to see the scenic relief behind the maltings. So I think we want to move on to the next slide. Track lane. So there's a nice picture of Ian there building a point. Track lane is almost complete on the scenic boards. We've got 2 of the 9 points left to complete. All the plain sections are laid with Permoy FlexiTrack, and we've got the points and crossings built from materials purchased from C&L, Permoy and S7 Group stores. All the points Ian has built, and we've sort of left to do really at this point, once that's complete, is finish the wiring, and we can then get the point motors in, test everything that's working, and then move on with ballasting, so that basically the rest of the group can then crack on with scenics, which is sort of scenic landscaping, which is quite a few of us are quite keen to get going on. If we move on to the next slide. Our inspiration for the station, being somewhere in Leicestershire, is Shackleton Station on the Battlefield line. We had a club trip out earlier this year to go and have a look around, take some photos, and get a feel for what the architecture is like in and around the railway. It's got an integrated platform canopy, which works well with our layout, because it's meant it fitted within the space that we actually had, because although we're modelling on a 24-foot section, when you start adding buildings in with all the track plan that we've got, you suddenly start running out of space quite quickly. And Shackleton also sits alongside the Ashby de la Zouch Canal, so this sort of gave a nice tie-in to the canal theme that we have at the other end of the layout. Next slide, please. So with the station, we have opted to build this from a kit. It's a kit that's come from Elcut Creative, and we're working with Jakob Elcut, who has helped us with customising some of the features of the kit, and supported with the addition of extra bolt-ons at each end of the station building, which puts it more in keeping with the actual design of Shackleton Station. By building from a kit, it's helped to shorten the development time for actually getting the model created. And the scenic team have learnt quite a few new skills in actually transforming this blank canvas, especially when they're looking at adding the actual interiors, lighting, fireplaces, and that, and other sort of interior decorations. Next slide, please. The platforms themselves are made from laser cut tops walls. They arrived, as Ian's put this morning, from Monksgate Models. So we've taken the decision, because of the way the platform was finished with a engineered brick front edge, when we visited Shaxton, it was felt that actually having it laser cut would be more effective and more prototypical of the station in going down that route, which is why we opted to have them in this sort of procure them in this way rather than trying to create from scratch. And I'm sure club members will be eager to get their paws on these next week. Next slide, please. Further examples of the platform panels. Keep going through those. Right, so goods shed. So the goods shed being fairly close to the station in the layout, we took the decision that we wanted to keep the station building in the same architectural design as, the goods shed in the same architectural design as the station building. So we bought a second kit from Elcut Creative for that. The kit's been customised to ensure scale is achieved with the planned design. And it's a through-road design with a loading bay to the rear. I know it's caused 1 or 2 headaches for poor old Malcolm putting this together, but he's persevered and he's working his way through it, and it's coming along really quite nicely at the moment. Next. There's an example photograph of it with it laid across the track plan. We're tracks in now, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, they are.
Yep. Next slide, please. Signal box. So the club had a layout called Helmthwaite, which unfortunately got vandalised. Was it the Market Deeping show? I can't remember. Several years ago. Oh yes, on the slide. Look. So it was the only sort of surviving piece of the layout really that was salvageable. So John and Jackie had held on to it since that day, and they have repurposed it and renamed it for Collingwood layout, and so it's going to live a second life within the Collingwood layout. Next slide. And as I touched on the other end of the layout, we've got a Maltings. So this has been built from a customised kit from JS Models this time. It's basically designed to be an imposing building on the layout at that end, and I think it's doing its job, having had it up at Guildex. And as I touched on earlier, to the rear of the building, we've built an extra section of baseboard to allow us to create a canal basin so that we can sort of demonstrate the narrowboats coming around the back for loading, offloading goods and materials. And I think Bruce is doing a fantastic job at putting this together, and it really is a labour of love. He's got 4 floors to internally fit out. So the hoppers that are going to represent the actual floors with the Maltings sitting there steeping and then air drying. So we'll have the different sort of representation on the different layers of the processes malt is generated within the factory. Next slide, please. And here's an example of it on the platform that we've built at that end, along with its boiler house and chimney.
That is a big chimney.
It is a big chimney. Next slide.
Need Fred Dibner next.
Yeah, well, we do probably need to represent Steeplejack somewhere. And this showing you the reverse of the Maltings with the extra baseboards that we've added on the back to give us the ability to represent the loading dock on the quayside behind. And JMRI, do you want to touch on this one, Ian? Because
I can do. So what we decided based on experiences from the Bowaters exhibition layout and also Thomas Hoy's Wapload layout is to use JMRI as an interface to control points and signals. So this is basically a screenshot of the plan, how it will actually look on a tablet for operation. So it'll be driven by a touchscreen or a mouse you can tap on, and it will control a little probably BlackBerry Pi little microcomputer, which will then send signals to the Cobalt digital point motors that we're going to install. And of course, if signals, we're using semaphore signals servo driven, so they'll have a servo driver board, and you get a DCC signal sent to the server board to operate the signals as well. So it's all self-contained, no need for any lever frames, no need for any fancy switching panels. It can all be done via a tablet. So that's our plan going forward for how we're going to control the points on our scenic side of the layout. And that wraps it up, really, doesn't it? I think, Simon.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh no, you've got next steps.
Yeah, so next steps, I mean, I think we've sort of touched on several of these as we've walked through. So Ian's got to finish building the final 2 points and track lane. We've then got to install the point motors, obviously start working on the ballasting. We've got to configure the control system for using JMRI and really continue the work on the buildings, the infrastructure, scenery, the landscaping across the sort of whole layout. Finish the canal basin, signalling, point rodding, and then I think Bruce is planning to paint our back scene, isn't he? So that will be no mean feat at 24 foot long, with an awkward bit going around the back of the maltings. And the plan is that we will be attending with Collingwood, I believe, again at Kettering.
And Wigan and Gildex. I'll come on to that at the end and just explain to people what we've decided for 2026.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, we'll move on to Coulsdon Central, which is Andy Sparks and Bill Bishop's work, and again a 24-foot layout. So if you unmute Andy and you're spotlit, and just let me know when you want me to change your slides.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. You might as well go on to the first slide now. That gives an overall plan of the layout. I mean, the rationale for the layout started when I got involved with disposing of an estate via a friend of mine. It contains a large number of Southern Electric units. I got rather tempted and bought far too many of them for myself. You may have seen my articles in the Gazette over this year where I've written up a little bit about the units, and it's those units that will feature on this layout, along with some steam and maybe sort of class 33 type diesel. So it's going to be set in the 50s and 60s, and that sort of transition era. So the rationale for the layout was really that I bought all this stuff but didn't have anywhere to run them. So my friend Bill suggested, why don't we build a layout together? And I said yes, somewhat foolishly. But then we thought it's a good idea to sort of link it in with the Guild Modular project. What we wanted was something that was clearly identifiable as a London Brighton or Southern origin layout to give a plausible setting for all the stock. Large enough to give a decent run for the EMUs, which could be sort of 4, 6 or 8 coaches long. And and it needs to be exhibitable because I haven't got room at home to set this up apart from in the garden. And therefore, sort of fitting in with the Guild's modular project layout made a lot of sense, but it can also be operated on its own with a couple of large turntable fiddle yards that I own for another layout. I also wanted to incorporate some interesting point work that I picked up secondhand, including a scissors crossover, which you can see sort of underneath where it says signal box on the track plan. And some 3-way points, but it's basically Pico track with an occasional Markway or similar sort of kit built points. Some of the Pico points I've tweaked slightly to fit the curvature of the track, but I have to admit it's not as beautifully sort of consistent a curve as they've managed on Collingwood. But we have gone for the same general idea of having a bit of a curve throughout the layout and some transition boards, which will connect our own transition boards, which will connect into the Guild's modular fiddle yard with sort of boards 12 and 13 of the Guild's modular scheme left off, just so very much the same way as Collingwood scheme. A prototypical location or prototype location would have been nice, but we couldn't find one which met all our needs. And if we did find one, it would have to have been very severely compressed, as is almost inevitable with our gauge and any sort of sizable station. So we settled on Coulsdon Central. Coulsdon partly because I live there, partly because it's a sort of Brighton line station, which was plausible for the traffic that we wanted to run. And our sort of rewriting of history is really that Coulsdon grew a lot in the period between the wars, became a bit of a new town, and the extra growth from that meant that the Southern decided to merge Coulsdon North and Coulsdon South stations into one new station called Coulsdon Central, and that as a result of the large population in Coulsdon, some of the trains that sort of terminate at Redhill, like the Reading services and the Tunbridge services, were extended through to Coulsdon to serve that population, which gives us an excuse to run some sort of steam hauled 3 or 4 coach passenger trains up, and they terminate in the loop platforms. So that's the basic concept of the layout, sort of a main line with loop platforms and enough to run sort of decent length trains. Can I have the next slide, Jackie?
I can. So I've just got the beach ball from hell at the moment, which is a bit worrying.
Right.
There we go.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. So this was just a brief bit on the wiring. I've kept it pretty simple. It's DCC. We're trying to keep to the sort of 2-wire principles, but I've got sort of the inner circuit and the outer circuit wired separately. So 4 wires going throughout the scenic section, with droppers to every piece of track. My interbaseboard connections at the moment are pretty simple pluggable chocolate blocks, which you can see top right and sort of slightly above center left, and they just connect into the next board. Once we've finished it, I will probably go for the XLR connectors like Ian has specified for the fiddle yard, but what I want to work out first is how on earth I'm going to control all the signals. So that hasn't even started yet, and that's probably a year or so off. So once we've worked that out, then I'll know how many wires I need to connect between each board, and we'll make some more decisions then. I mean, the signals we've got I acquired from the same estate as the EMUs, and it's a rather lovely set of absolute aspects, mainly 3 aspect with a few 4 aspect colour light signals of the style that we used by the Southern in the sort of 30s and BR Southern in the 50s. So with sort of rounded corners to them. They're very distinctively Southern and will look the part on the layout, but I'm really struggling a bit to understand how I'm going to control them at this stage. So that's been put off for the moment. I think that's probably it on the wiring. So could I have the next slide, please, Jackie?
Yeah, just before we move on, Richard says we've got a question from Dr. Dave Robinson.
Yes, Dr. Dave's asked,
Sure.
How will the guild boards be shared out, given most people will wish to exhibit at Guildex and other guild shows?
What we'll be doing is rotating who actually exhibits at the guild shows. So as and when people are finished and ready to exhibit, then they will actually take their turn to actually fit in to the scenic gap. So there's only one set of end curves and one fiddle yard. So obviously there's only one gap, and it will depend on who's ready when, who can take it in turns to actually fill the gap. So it's on a rotation basis as and when people are ready. I'll mention that again at the end, Dave.
Probably
so
fair
that,
to
that might help if I talk about it at the end.
probably fair to say at the moment, Jackie, that there are more shows than layouts sort of ready, anything like ready at the moment, aren't there? So it
Yeah.
won't be a problem in the short term, but in the longer term, there'll have to be a bit of rationing, and that would be good to provide variety for the viewers.
Absolutely.
I would have thought. So this is, this is where we've got to so far. Progress is that I've effectively got 6 of the 8. We've got 8 scenic boards. I've got 6 of the 8 boards laid, wired, and working and tested. And I had it set up in my garden in the summer, and you can see a picture of that looking from the scissors crossover towards one end. Just in the top left-hand corner, you can see the corner of my turntable fiddler, which we're using for this. But yeah, that all worked. And if we cover the next slide, please. Looking the other way, you can see how far we've got. So that's sort of down to board 6. The last 2 boards will carry that viaduct. And at the moment, no track has been laid on that, although we have made a bit more progress since the summer, which I can show you on the next slide, please, Jackie. So that's where the final 2 boards are in terms of current progress. That was taken last week. It's 2 boards there, but the viaduct, we couldn't bear. We inherited the viaduct from a chap called Dave Hunt, who had built it, but then couldn't use it in the way he wanted. It's beautifully constructed on a very gentle, about 11-foot radius curve. We couldn't bear. The original idea was to cut it in half, but we couldn't bear to do that. So the actual viaduct comes off, and the track will be laid straight onto that, and the 2 boards underneath will just be there for scenery and will support the viaduct. And then at the right-hand end of that viaduct, that will lead straight onto my turntable fiddle yards when it's in sort of not in guild use, and when it's in guild use, there'll be a short transition board which will take the track centres out to the correct 100mm for the fiddle yard boards and get the alignment and the angles right. So both ends of the core layout will need a short sort of 1 foot to 18-inch transition board to connect into the guild boards. I'm not as familiar. Well, I'm not at all familiar with Template and CAD like Ian is. So I've done all my planning on a system called AnyRail, which is pretty good for the track laying, particularly with Pico track, but it isn't quite as accurate as the CAD. So I've still got to do some measurements next time Collingwood's up at an exhibition, and before I put the final. Before I build the final 2 little transition boards, but they'll be very simple, small structures that will just link up the layout to the guild boards. That's really all I was going to say on the layout. I think, the planners at the moment is that we said we would have a work in progress layout to exhibit at Kempton Park next December, and that's still the plan as far as I'm aware. It won't be fully scenic. Probably won't have any signals at that stage, though maybe we'll get some working. But it will be complete and operational, which I think I anticipate being so in the next couple of months. So be capable of running them some trains. Quite how much scenery will be done, I don't know. It's basically a 2-man band who are working on the layout, but we do have the advantage that we basically have 1 day a week when we can concentrate on it fully, and so we can make reasonable progress. Whereas if you're in a club, you might have a lot more people, but you probably only got 2 or 3 hours in an evening, and you've got to set it up and take it down again, which will delay progress. So I think there's swings and roundabouts in that. Yeah. But yeah, that's the state of progress at the moment. So I'm happy to take any questions now, or do you want to do them at the end, Jackie?
We've got space for questions at the end, if that's all right with everybody. And we'll just carry on and go through some of the other participants. So I'm going to talk for Risborough District Club because unfortunately James is out of the country at the moment. Many of you may realise that you actually saw their 12 feet long layout at Kempton Park in the summer. So you may well have seen this out once because it was showing progress of a 12 feet section. So it will link with another 12-foot section in order to fill the 24-foot gap. So this gives you an idea of what is going to represent a small quarry with crusher, sorting and hopper discharge buildings that deal with stone before being unloaded into hopper wagons that join on to the Southern Railway track. And the actual track plan, as you can see, is all being done in template there, which James is very familiar with. So it depicts this small yard and an engine shed based on Meldon Quarry, which is near Oakhampton. It's on the Southern Railway, so we've got yet again a tilt towards the Southern line. And it's all being constructed by club members at the Risborough District Club. As I say, it's a 12 feet long section, and it can stand alone, which you'll see in the following pictures, by having some extra baseboards attached to it, and it has been exhibited as standalone. But as far as the actual displaying of their work within the modular layout goes, they're obviously waiting for somebody else with a 12-foot section to get to the point where they can join up with them and use the whole lot together as a scenic section. So this was the very early stages where you can see the track and ballast laid onto the cork, signal box at the back, and then one of the sheds at the front there. And then it moved on. So on the left-hand side, you can see the scenic section, which will be the section which joins into the modular part. And the bridge makes the scenic break where it will actually join onto the other layout. And then you've got their additional boards on the right-hand side picture, which makes it a standalone layout. So they've obviously got the cassette here, which will move from side to side and run the trains in on the two lines. And it's this familiar two lines, which actually are the main connectors that go round onto the half circles and then round to the fiddle yards. When you've got two 12-foot sections, you've got two areas on the fiddle yard boards. So one group of people will be basically operating using the front set of fiddle yard tracks, and the other group will use the rear set of fiddle yard tracks. And we may come back to a drawing later just to ensure that you can understand that. It may be Ian can pull something up just to show how they'll use the different parts of the fiddle yard and not have to get crossed over with each other. But it took quite a lot of planning to make sure that one's using the front section and one's using the rear section. So they've basically got their own fiddle yards, their own two tracks going through. And yes, people say, well, what happens if you've got modern image that's joined up with something steam? But does it really matter? Because they are two layouts which are basically functioning side by side, but operating very separately. So that's as far as Risborough District have got. They're taking it out and about as a standalone section, gradually working on more and more of the scenics. And you can see that the bridge is just stood there at the moment. That needs some more work in progress. But they are basically desperately waiting for another 12-foot section to join up with, and then they'll be able to fill the whole gap. Ian, I'm going to pass back to you about what Stephen Fay and Stephen Shepherd are doing, if that's all right.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. So Stephen Fay, like I said, Jackie mentioned, is unable to join us this evening. He's got other commitments, and he's participating as an individual. His layout will be based on 7 Tunnel West, and he has placed an order with Grange and Hodder for boards already to make a 12-foot section. He's going to be basing it roughly circa 1961, and his layout, like the others involved with the project, will be DCC controlled. Stephen has said, though, his current progress is that he has ordered some laser cut kits from some of the line side buildings, and commissioned the signal box to be built. Commissioned the signals to be built. Better read what I've written, haven't I? The track plan has been drawn in template and will be hand laid using Pico components. He'll have more updates in due course and will post progress on the Guild forum. We did ask Stephen if he had anything else to add since he submitted this, but he currently hasn't. Next slide, please, Jackie. And as Jackie also mentioned, Stephen Shepherd is participating as an individual. His layout is called Kimpton. Stephen has recently rejoined the project, I think, and hopes to get started over this winter and has a plan to finish in 12 months' time. So it's going to be quite a concerted effort from himself in 2026. The plan is a 12-feet section, all scenic, which will be based on an ex-Midland Railway suburban station set in the BR Steam era. As you can see from his plan, he intends to use eco components throughout as well, so that's points. I don't know if that says single slip or a diamond crossing in there and plain track. Okay, and the next slide. Mike Green, he started planning what he's going to do. He's not with us this evening, unfortunately, but he does have a nice space in his big shed where he's currently got another layout to build part of scenic section for the modular layout project. And I believe, is he doing 24 feet, Jackie?
Yes, that was the plan, and he's collecting his template at Wigan.
Yes, he is. So that's another 24-foot section that's going to be built and in progress at some point. Mike's quite lucky in that he can build his own points from his own point kits, of course, because he's Mike Green of Greenwood Model Products. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay. Just a very brief update on Keighley Model Railway Club, because I'm sure many people who followed this project know that when Charles was first involved in the embryonic stage of this, Keighley Model Railway Club were very keen to actually take forward two elements. So the first one was a layout called Coverdale, which they would have as an existing layout. And what they needed to do with that was just to actually make two new transition boards, which would join onto the Guild modular sections. But that layout is used as a standing O gauge layout within the club rooms. So to remove that would cause them a huge void in terms of what they could run on, etc. So they decided what they would do was plan and build a new 24-foot scenic section called Doncaster Races, which they'd started planning. They would work on that first, and then that could replace Coverdale when Coverdale came out to actually join up with the Guild sections. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, they've had a real lack of volunteers in O gauge. It's a multi-gauge club, and the number of O gauge modelers has dwindled, not through anything in particular. There's been all sorts of reasons, but it was becoming quite onerous for those who were remaining with the project. And they decided that it was probably better, because when you lose your mojo, as many of you know, it's kind of like, what do we do now? We're not making much progress. It's actually becoming, less interesting because we're not seeing it move forward. So they decided the best thing to do was pause any plans at the moment and pull out of participating. But I'm quite sure when they get some more people on board, the enthusiasm will be reignited and they'll come back in and join the project again. So that's basically what's happened to Keighley and Coverdale and Doncaster Races. And we all know, I'm sure everybody in this room knows, that sometimes your modelling's going at a great pace and then things happen or personnel change, and you just go through a sort of slow period and then it might pick up again. So let's hope that they'll be back soon. So what next? Well, we had such amazing feedback from people looking at the modular layout running at Guildex 2025. It sparked more interest. We've obviously got Stephen Shepherd, who's come on recently since Guildex. Mike Green is wanting to join the project. And I'm sure we will get more inquiries. And the fact that all you need to do is build 12 feet or a 24 feet section and then join it up with others boards to make a big continuous run is very actually inviting for many. So it's been decided by the management committee that having invested in this and used the legacy money that was kindly left to us, that we need to get it out and about much more. And you putting it out once a year at Gildex is actually not good for the layout to sit idle for 11 months. And also, it's a great shame that it's hidden away for 11 months of the year. So it's actually going to come to all of the shows in 2026. Now, this is where it picks up on what Dr. Dave was talking about. At the moment, the only one which can come out and fill the scenic section is Collingwood, because that's at the point where it's progressed enough to join up to the rest of the boards. When you see it at Kettering, you will see that it has developed further. It'll still be the only one that's ready to come out at Wigan in the summer, because of course that moves to summer next year. And then it'll go to Gildex again in 2025. So you will see what was basically two lines running at Gildex develop and evolve over the next sort of 9 months. Coulston Central, as Andy mentioned, is going to be ready to actually be shown as a non-scenic version, but it will be work in progress, just like Collingwood was at Gildex at Kempton Park in December 2026. Just working out what year it is. Who am I? Where am I? And obviously that's going to be the winter show, and we've acquired an extra room at both Kettering and Kempton to facilitate this. So, we're really putting a lot behind the fact that people will be able to see a very large continuous running layout, which people have participated with at all of the guild shows now. As soon as we've got two 12-foot layouts ready, they will be coming out and exhibited too. And as it evolves and we get more and more participants, then hopefully we will get to the point where every time it comes out, there will be different participants showing what they've done. Talking to some people at Gildex, they were really pleased to see that the concept and the idea, which was written about nearly 2 years ago, has come to fruition. It is working. It does actually all join up. It does actually work. And that, I think, has started to encourage more people to come off the fence and think, actually, we could do that. So if you are an individual or a club or a no gauge group, then you can see that it really does work, and we'd be really pleased to have you on board. The other thing we've said is that there's no reason why the scenic sections plus the guild boards couldn't go to other non-guild shows. So if we were talking to Hornby about the Great Electric Train Show, or British Railway Modelling about the Warner shows, the festivals of railway modelling at Doncaster or Ali Pali or at the NEC, then if they would like to invite the guild boards to their show with a scenic section, then there's no reason why we can't actually go much wider and demonstrate to the rest of the country and to other modelers that modular O-gauge boards do work. People have seen it in many other gauges, but not necessarily in O-gauge, and we'll be writing more articles for the national press about it as well, and letting people know that you may be put off O-gauge because it needs such a big space if you want something big, but actually this is an opportunity to build something small, but join it up with other boards to make it bigger in the long run. So,
Jackie, I've got a question from Andy in relation to Kimpton. How will the diamond crossing on Kimpton work with it sharing the 12-foot section with another layout?
I'll have to go back to the Kimpton plan and see if Ian can answer that.
Well, that actually is a very good question. And it might be that Stephen doesn't realise that if he's joined up to another 12-foot section, he will only be controlling one half of the loop. He won't be controlling the other loop. So that's something I think we might need to mention to Stephen, because he might not be aware of that. But it is a very valid question, Andy, actually, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he's got his 2 lines coming in and 2 lines going out, but like you say, it's the controlling of all of that that may cause a problem when it's joined up elsewhere.
yeah, I mean, it's obviously nobody else has put apart from, well, I mean, no, I won't say nobody else. Let me rephrase it. Those people that are involved with 12-foot sections, as far as I'm aware, none of them have what is look like a crossover between the 2 main lines to a completely separate set of sidings or a bay platform. So yeah, I'll email Stephen tomorrow and make sure that he's aware that when he's connected to another 12-foot section, he will only be using one of the main lines, not both of them. Because that was a question you had early on, Andy, wasn't it, for you about would there be a scissors crossover in the fiddle yard boards?
Yes, can I speak?
Yeah, of course
Yeah,
you
of
can.
course
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, yeah. So anyway, yeah, I mean, it's the isolation between the SL's E790BH and the point to the right, upper right of that needs to be, that needs to be completely bulletproof for
Oh
it to
yeah.
work as part of the modular layout. But also, he's got to realise that he won't be able to use that crossover when it's in. It's being used as part of the modular layout, so it's a bit of a surprising track layout.
It is. Yeah.
I think for the modular layout, that's all I was thinking. But I mean, yes, Charles asked me the same question about my scissors crossover, and that wouldn't be acceptable if it was a 12-foot section. But because it's we'll be operating just us, I think it works okay.
Yeah, and we've got the same thing because we've got a single slip as part of a crossover, but as Collingwood is a self-contained 24-foot section, it's not a problem for us either.
They've got another question as well, which sort of adds into talking about 12-foot sections. How will model control work? Does each scenic board provide their own control?
Okay, yeah, Kenneth. The premise is if there are 2 groups with 2 12-foot sections, one group will have control of one of the loops and the other group will have control of the other loop. So they need to make sure that when it's wired up, they only have their wiring for one of the loops. Jackie's quickly.
I know where I'm going, don't you?
I do. I know where you're going.
I'm
Back to
getting
my
there.
wiring diagram.
Oh, there, missed it.
Oh,
one
back
more.
one.
There one.
There you go. So if you can see here, it's not that easy to see, but right through the middle of the fiddle yard is basically the dividing line between, let's say, north and south. So if you're north of the line, you've got everything to the north. If you're south of the line, you've got everything to the south. As the curve boards go left and right away from the fiddle yards and they come round to the front, there are no points. There is no wiring connectivity between the inside loop or the outside loop. And we would expect for 2 groups that have got 12-foot sections, they have individual wiring for their inside loop and their outside loop, so that only one group can control one loop and the other group can control the other loop. Hopefully that answers your question, Kenneth.
Simon Bowles has put a question in. For 12-foot sections, there is a consideration for each group featured to make sure they have modelled any features, sidings, loops on alternative loops. How has this been managed?
Going to Risborough's group, they've got sidings on one side of a loop only. And with it being the way the modular layout has been designed, and with the track centers in the center of the boards, it means that they can exhibit the layout with the sidings to the front or with the sidings to the back, depending upon how they orientate the boards. So if Risborough are at an exhibition with another group that's got 12-foot section, they could be operating the inside loop and therefore have their sidings on the inside. Or if they're operating the outside loop, they would have the sidings on the outside and would be controlling them there. Hopefully, another group next to them who might have sidings will then have their sidings on the opposite side. But like I say, in theory, if everyone builds boards to the same spec, you can rotate the boards 180 degrees and just change which side of the loops the sidings are, so you don't have any conflicts.
I think the other thing to say is we are evolving. Up until very recently, the only group who had done a 12-foot section was Risborough, and James thought long and hard about how to make sure that his could be rotated so it could either, sit at this side or the far side, and equally have their sidings, as Ian said, on either side of the boards, depending on how they joined up. What we will be doing more frequently now as more participants come on board is have some Zoom meetings so that we can share how things are actually progressing and make sure that people like Stephen Shepherd, who's done Kimpton, and Stephen Fay and Mike Green as he comes on board, and others who might join us in the future, can talk about those sorts of things and actually make sure that we don't stumble before we've actually reached the join up stage. Because it's, as more people come on board and become creative, we need to ensure that people can actually join up and have the operating systems that they want without causing problems for themselves.
Are you able to quickly go back to Risborough's track plan? Because it'll show there, won't it, how James has got round that particular subject.
And this has generated another question as well.
Hold on, one moment, Richard. So you can see here, going back to Simon's question, the inside loop there has no points on it. So the group operating that will not conflict with anything that Risborough are doing if they're operating the bottom half of the layout effectively.
So this
Okay,
will be
Richard, sorry.
theirs, and that would be somebody else's if they're joining up.
Carry on, Richard, with the question.
If you rotate a 12-foot section, how does that affect the XLR wiring if a group chooses to use that interconnection?
It won't, because the XLR connectors will still be wired the same way. I just hope that they would allow for that by having additional XLR connectors on the other face of their baseboards.
Right. And another follow-up question from Kenneth. A follow-on question. Why were manual point switches installed on the fiddle yard rather than DCC ones? And on the control bit, does each scenic board provide their own DCC controller?
Okay, because there had to be compatibility for a group or a club providing a 24-foot section that was DC only, we couldn't install DCC controlled point motors on the fiddle yard boards because they may not have the capability to do so. In terms of operation of points on scenic boards, that is wholly left to each individual group, how they decide to control their points and whether they use analog, digital, cobalt IPs, or whether they're using tortoise or Smale or servos or even solenoids per se. So that's just down to personal choice in terms of how they operate and how they control. St Neots with Collingwood, as I mentioned, are going to be using JMRI for controlling points and signals. Another group may be using a lever frame to control their points and signals. Another group might be using a control panel with toggle switches. So it's allowed a variety of options going forward for each group.
Andy Sparks has popped in with a question. I'm pleased to hear that the fiddle yards will be available for other big shows. It makes it easier for me than trying to run Bring and Buy and a layout for the same show. How will transport work for non-guild shows?
It would be exactly the same as if you were invited to go to a show with a layout from your club. So effectively, if let's just say Hornby, for example, said we'd like you to bring the modular layout to the Great Electric Train Show, they would need to pay for the transport and accommodation because that participant could be coming from Scotland or the South Coast or Cambridgeshire. And obviously, we would make sure that wherever the van was going from, it would have to pick up the boards from the guild storage. So, any big shows that invite a layout will usually pay that layout to attend by providing van hire, accommodation and travel expenses. So you would be effect saying, well, we're taking this whole layout for you, and showing what can be done with O gauge and modules all put together. So that's what we would expect to happen.
But what
I
about the
think my
situation where
concern,
a
Jackie,
layout
was that
about the situation where the fiddle yard comes from the guild storage in Cambridgeshire and the scenic 24 or 12-foot bit comes from Cardiff. It could be two transports.
yeah, that was my concern.
Yeah, and that's where we would
You
have
could be
to
end up
have,
with two vans.
yeah, we'd have to discuss that with the people who want to invite the layout. I mean, if you think about the size of Pete Waterman's layout when it goes out to the Hornby shows, you know, if you're running Warner's as a commercial unit, or if you're doing the Hornby show, then Glasgow, for example, again, where you've got huge layouts arriving from somewhere else in the country, out of town, we would have to have discussions with them about how much it would cost to get the whole kit and caboodle to their venue.
The perfect example of that is Eastfield, isn't it, that went to Glasgow,
Yeah, yep,
which is huge.
yep. And Simon
Simon George.
George's layout takes an Arctic lorry. So that's something that when it's
Free art,
invited,
totally.
Yeah,
sorry, free
Free.
Arctic, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but certainly that's something we'll negotiate as and when the opportunity arises, and I hope it does. I really do hope it does.
He'll need a separate van just for the new cooling towers as well, won't he?
Yes.
Okay, let's just finish off and then we can open it up and stop screen sharing. So I guess our invitation to everybody, and please pass the word on because there's lots of other people in your clubs, in your O gauge groups, individuals you talk to, people on the forum. If you want to build a 12 feet long O gauge layout, or a 24-foot one, which can be standalone and that you can use it yourself wherever you want to or within your club, you can now have the opportunity to join it up to the rest of the modules for continuous running. Participants will each get at least one opportunity to exhibit at Guildex, and at the moment, as you can see, because of the having fewer participants, people are going to see the same layout several times as it evolves, which is not a bad thing because you'll see the growth of Collingwood. The 3.6 metre sections or the 12-foot sections will be partnered with another one, but which each have their own tracks to use, and we've talked about that. But I think it is an absolutely huge opportunity. The concept has been proven, it does work. So I hope that if anybody else is out there in their club or as individuals you're interested and you'd like more information, please do email me and we'll make sure that my email address is actually on the video at the end so that you can see that. What we have is specifications. We can tell you what height it's got to be. We issue everybody with the Intentio template. Mike Green is collecting his when he comes up to Wigan. We've got all of the details about the project. And the other thing is there are some advantages because there is some discount from Grange and Hodder. We'd need to check what the latest offering is because it's been a while since anybody joined in and ordered modules, but there is some discount if you decide to use the Grange and Hodder boards. The template comes to you free of charge because that's been supplied by Intentio. Pico have supplied the track for the guild boards and have basically said that if participants want to use the suppliers of Pico track, then, they may be able to negotiate some discount from their outlets. Ellis Clark provides a £50 voucher to any participants so that they can source something from Ellis Clark trains. We actually bought our point motors for Collingwood via Ellis and used our £50 voucher towards those. Elcut Creative are providing £100 for anybody sourcing something from them. And as you saw from Collingwood, we've actually purchased 2 buildings from Elcut, which that £100 voucher has gone towards. And we were very, very grateful as well to DCC Concepts, who discounted the price of the point motors for the fiddle yard. So that's been very good in terms of making sure we get the best use of the legacy money that we've been dipping into. So all in all, there are some benefits as well, and a lot of encouragement from people to actually see this develop further and for more participants to join in.
Jackie,
So,
the one that we've forgotten, of course, is Squires.
who provide the wiring?
Helped with providing the wiring for the Guild Fiddleyard boards as well.
Yes,
So
they did.
they were very kind and sponsored that for us.
Yes,
The
yeah, they
Guild.
provided all of the pretty coloured wires that you saw that have been put together on all of the guild boards. So some of these people are very much, they've supported the guild boards in order to make it happen, but there are advantages to individuals from Ellis Clark and Elcut, and obviously discount from Grange and Hodder, and getting the Intentio template for anybody who wants to participate. So I'm going to stop screen sharing at the moment and come to any questions. And then we'll come back briefly to the roundup slides as usual at the end.
Yeah, I've got a question from Chris, Jackie. If someone wanted to emulate St. Neots and incorporate the 2 transition sections in the scenic, and how long does that end up being?
With the new transition boards, Ian can give you an answer to that straight away because
Let me see.
it still fits the 24 set.
You still have 24 feet
Gap.
overall, roughly, for the curve boards. And then we've got our transition boards on the end. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me open CAD and I'll give you a figure in a couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, but I'm certainly, although we've changed the curve on St. Neots, it still has to fit the 24-foot gap, which is why we had to change the transition boards so that we could actually gradually curve across and join up with the end curves, if that makes sense. So it's still got to be the same length, but it obviously has to gently curve across the transition boards rather than if you were building a straight front, it cuts across at more of an angle.
I understand that, Jackie. I was just looking at if, as you did, by incorporating the transition board into the scenic area to produce a much nicer curve, and it does look good. How long a scenic area that then results in? Because obviously going to be 24 feet plus a lump at each end.
The transition board replaces the guild transition board, so it has to be the same
Of course it does, yeah.
dimensions, just a different curve on it. And where you put your scenic break then changes the difference between your scenic bit. So our transition boards are what, Ian? Have you managed to get that open yet?
Bear with. Yeah, I'm just measuring now.
Nearly there.
1380 on the outside edge
Oh, Simon's found it.
and 1234 on the inside edge.
It's actually across the transition boards, 10 meters and 68 mil.
What do you mean from one end to the other?
From one end of one transition board to one end of the other transition board. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just over 10 metres.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
But
Pleasure.
basically, all you're doing when you've used the transition boards for scenics is you move your scenic breaks out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because we did discuss this ourselves, didn't we, about whether we do that as well and expand our scenery onto the transition boards. And in the end, we decided not to.
If I could just say, on Coulsdon Central, we've got about 30 foot of scenery, and then we'll have about 18 inches each end of smaller transition board. You need to have something that's not scenic because you need to go from the standard 80 mil track centres to 100 mil track centres, which is what it is around the curve on the Guild fiddly yard boards. So you need to sort of, unless you're prepared to have a very strange diverging track on your scenic section, you need a bit that's not scenic.
And I think the other thing is this is a huge opportunity, not just for people who are in the UK, but also if Michael Doolan, who I hope still's with us in Ireland, or the group in Germany were wanting to build some scenic boards, or in Denmark or anywhere in Europe, if all you've got to transport to the UK is 12 foot or 24 feet, it's a lot more manageable than trying to bring a 40-foot by 20-foot layout. So it's also an opportunity for bringing a small section from Europe or elsewhere in the world and actually joining it up to all the guild boards so that they can actually have a big continuous running layout. So it's not exclusive to any club or individual or any place in the world. Hopefully it opens up the opportunity to lots of other people.
Especially going forward with next year being our 70th and promoting our overseas members as well and what they're doing. Okay, any more questions from anybody? That's a resounding no. Well, from my point of view, I hope you've all got a bit more of an insight in what each group is currently doing with the Guild Modular project. And like Jackie mentioned, those of you that currently aren't involved might be able to talk some of your fellow club members or friends into doing a 12-foot section, for example.
Okay, I'll bring up the last few slides, Ian.
Yeah. Yeah, see you at Wigan, Alex. Indeed. Okay, as is usual for this part of the seminar, this part of the session, the final hurdle to get over. I think we're all members here this evening, but if there's any non-members who are watching this recording at a future date, if you're not already a guild member, please consider joining the guild. Currently £30 UK, £35 rest of the world, and there is digital membership available for £25 a year. If you go to the Guild website, gageyourguild.com, and click on About Us, this brings down a drop-down box, and you then click onto the Join Online, which gives you the opportunity to do it really easily and electronically, and it brings you the membership application form page up where you can see the membership rates currently for 2025. You obviously select the one that you wish to take part in, or which you wish to take up, whether you're annual UK, overseas, digital student membership for £5, digital membership for £25, or take advantage of the 1 month trial for the online benefits to see what it is about. And then you're given the opportunity to convert to a 12-month membership at the end of that. And you just fill in your details on the rest of the page. Also, don't forget to have a look at our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and of course have our now well-known YouTube channel. And a refreshed YouTube page now with the Guild's 70th anniversary logo. Currently 616 visible public videos for you to watch at your leisure with either a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey, as two of our members have shown tonight. If you are a Guild member, though, there are some other videos that you can see. So there are actually more than 616 in total. Some of those other videos are only available via the Guild website itself. But that video list is increasing all the time. And finally, our show for the end of the year, December, the winter show at Wigan, Robin Park Leisure Centre, Saturday, 6th of December from 9:30 till 4 o'clock. Ticket prices, public £17, members and partners £12 each, under 16s £1. And then looking forward to 2026, Saturday, 7th of March is our spring show at Kettering. Saturday, the 30th of May, the summer show at Wigan. Saturday, the 5th and Sunday, the 6th of September, Guildex 2026. And then Saturday, 12th of December, the winter show at Kempton Park.
And I think it's fair to say that this next year is our 70th. We'll certainly be having displays at all of the shows, representing the history of the Guild and having some extra displays and hopefully having a European layout at some of the shows as well.
There was another slide, Jackie.
I do beg your pardon. I failed miserably. I'll get it back, I promise. Here we go.
Ta-da! An evening with for 2026. Andy Sparks, who's been with us this evening, has very kindly taken over the reins as coordinator for these seminars for next year, which gives me the opportunity to stand down after 3.5 years. Just a reminder, they are nominally on the 26th of each month, running from January to November. Events go live, as always, at 2000 hours, 8 p.m. And you can register at www.gageoguild.com. Jackie.
Sorry. Andy, thank you very much for doing that, because I know these sessions are very important, and as you can see by the number of overseas members who've joined us, it reaches out to all sorts of people in different parts of the world, whatever time of day it is. And Ian, thank you very, very much as well. It seems ages ago, because I know you took over from me when we got these started during COVID, and you've been doing it for the last few years. So a huge thank you to Ian as well for leading the evening with. So I think that's it for us this evening. And Michael's just said he's hoping to bring a new Irish layout to Guildex in 2026, which would be wonderful. So do get in touch with Steve Robinson, and if you haven't already, that would be wonderful. And hopefully we'll see lots of you at Wigan. 10 days to go, and hopefully I've had words with everybody and said I'm not putting up with another hurricane this year.
Do you see, Andy? No rain.
The forecast is typical Wigan sort of drizzle and moderate breeze at the moment. So
that's fine.
I believe the forecast is far off, but I think we can live with that, can't we?
Yeah. A bit of drizzle won't hurt anybody.
It's better than the BBC saying, don't go out, you're going to die, which was what was happening last year. And I was driving in thinking, please don't say that. We're not going to get anybody at the show. But it's been really good this year.
Michael saying, thanks for a very informative night, and may I wish you all a happy Christmas and a great new year.
And to you too, Michael, if you're still here.
Yeah, and Joss has said that they'll do their best, and thanks to Ian and everybody for organising an evening with, and to Andy for taking up the reins. That message has come through from Dr. Dave, who I know attends all of these, and as I say, they are very popular, and it's much appreciated that people take the time to organise them. And I know Phil Taylor, who's sitting in Virginia at the moment, has also kindly agreed to host some of the meetings. So wherever you are in the world, we can rope you in, you know.
I think he only said he would co-host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at the moment.
But at least it's a co-host, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Dave, for your comment. Appreciate it. Very kind. So I shall stop the recording now.